I think we're one of the largest chains, if not the largest chain in the country, that doesn't have a Coke or Pepsi contract. When we started Sweetgreen, people looked at us and said, that's not a real meal. People don't want to eat like that.
Sweetgreen went public in November 2021 and hit a market value of over $5.5 billion. What was that IPO day like?
The actual day of going public was incredibly rewarding. We gave stock out to all of our team members. Every team member from dishwasher to manager got stock. We brought some of our farmers to the floor of the IPO.
The Sweetgreen salads right now average around $14 to $16. But there's also the side of meeting consumers where their wallet is today.
I think this year especially has been the most jarring because everything just got really expensive in their life. Everything. Our consumers really feeling it, and you see it in every part of their spend. And so consumers are pulling back. So we think a lot about that price value equations, not just what is the price of the bowl or the meal, is do I feel like what I'm paying is worth it?
I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. Building one of the most influential food brands of the last generation doesn't start with a business plan. Sometimes it starts with a stolen laptop and a lot of faith. Nicolas Jammet is the co-founder of Sweetgreen, the fast casual brand that helped redefine how Americans think about healthy food at scale. Raised in New York City around his parents' legendary French restaurant, La Caravelle, Nicolas grew up steeped in hospitality long before he ever set foot in a startup. He went on to meet his two co-founders at Georgetown, where the three of them launched Sweetgreen in 2007, just days after losing their original recipes in a break-in that could have ended the company before it began. Nearly 2 decades later, Sweetgreen has grown from a single shop in Washington, D.C. into a publicly traded company with hundreds of locations nationwide and an ambitious plan to scale to over 1,000 stores. Today, Nicolas serves as Chief Concept Officer, shaping everything from menu innovation to brand, technology, and the customer experience. In this conversation, Nicolas reflects on what it takes to keep a founding team together for nearly 2 decades, the realities of taking a consumer brand public, and the constant tension between quality, mission, and price. We also dig into Sweetgreen's bet on automation and AI, the lessons learned from Infinite Kitchen, why fast casual is facing a value perception crisis, and how data, loyalty, and community will shape the next era of food. This is Nicolas Jammet's Social Currency. Nicolas Jammet, welcome to Social Currency.
Happy to be here.
So we're going to get into the Sweetgreen of it all. But before that, your parents ran La Caravelle, which is one of New York City's most beloved French restaurants. I have to ask, from an early age, did you have any kind of inkling that you were going to go into the food industry?
Yes and no. I grew up in this family, and even beyond my parents, back 5 generations, everyone was either building something or creating something in hospitality. Hotels, restaurants, cafes. You could kind of say it was in my blood, and so I was very familiar with it. I knew it. I grew up with my parents running La Caravelle, and they ran it the old school way. Like if they weren't there, the restaurant was closed. They greeted every customer. They picked every detail. There was this beautiful element to the level of detail and how deep they were. And I saw them building it, blood, sweat, and tears, weekends, everything. And so I always knew it was something I was familiar with. I probably thought I'd end up more in the hotel side. Mm-hmm. But then, senior year, everything happened.
All of those details that you're mentioning, I recently finished the book Unreasonable Hospitality.
One of the greatest books.
Which blew my mind. Just hearing about the level of detail and attention in order to make the customer experience really just top notch. I'm sure your parents, it sounds like they lived and breathed that every day.
Everything from being maniacal about the product and the story to just, again, the experience and people feeling like they were going somewhere where they were seen and they were known and was like their home. The community my parents built around that, and they still have today, 30, 40 years later, is incredible.
I need to know, were there any lessons that you learned just being in that fine dining atmosphere that you consciously decided not to apply to the fast casual world?
If anything, there were more principles from this fine dining world that I knew that we did carry into fast food. And that was kind of the point. We were trying to elevate and rethink the whole fast food model, from the product you source to how you prepare it, to how you tell the stories, to ultimately the customer experience and that loyalty that you want to build. And we didn't really see anyone doing that in fast food. And we thought there was an opportunity to kind of take, the best of, some fine dining restaurants in a way that was scalable and convenient for the customer. And so if anything, we were always inspired more to think about elements in fine dining or even from other industries that we'd see that we didn't see happening in fast food.
I want to jump ahead a little bit. So you meet your two co-founders at Georgetown. I was listening to another conversation that all three of you had, and I heard something pretty wild. 2 days before the Sweetgreen opening of the very first location, your apartment was robbed.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that night?
Sure. So it was senior year, 2007, and we'd been writing the business plan all year, raising money. We signed a lease. A lot of people kind of thought it was like a school senior year project. They didn't take it as seriously, but we ended up raising $350,000 from dozens of people. Anyone that would talk to us or look at us or give us even like $1,000. We started construction, and I lived directly across the street. My senior year dorm apartment was across the street, and as was for John and Nate. And so we'd be running from class to the dorm to the construction site all day. And so we were always in and out of this apartment. We had been building for the last few months all the training manuals, the recipes, the full concept on paper. And 2 days before opening, we get back to the apartment and our computers are gone. And this was before the days of really like backing up etiquette, backing up hygiene.
Yeah.
And so from that day on, we always backed up, but it forced us to kind of just stay up all night for 2 straight nights and recreate and piece things together from our email and just from our memory and rebuilt it. And we ended up opening 2 days later. So pulled it off.
So when you went into that first day, did you feel fully prepared, or was there a part of you that was like, oh my gosh, like what if something goes terribly wrong and there's an ingredient that we needed but we're missing? Like how did you mentally feel going into that very first opening day?
I remember very vividly the opening day, week, and month, and we were so excited to bring this to life. We were building this for ourselves. We were the customers. This all started because we were having this conversation every day about where do we want to eat? What makes us feel good? We didn't really have options that made sense. And so we were really excited. Opening day was, I think we did like $1,500 and we didn't know if that was a lot or a little. And every day grew from there. But I remember just the chaos of it all.
Yeah.
Like learning everything for the first time, having to hire team members and train them. Our first team was all students from Georgetown that we hired because we wanted to have a cool vibe and team. And finally, on opening day of classes, they all just like no-showed and just no one came in. And so we said, let's hire some real folks that know how to actually work in a restaurant.
And I'm sure that specific example is one of thousands where things did not go to plan, especially building a business where, just as you said, people have to show up every day. It's a physical business. You're selling food, which is highly perishable. Like the different verticals and pillars of things could go wrong is kind of endless. So in your experience, not necessarily just talking about this opening mishap, but how do you think about navigating situations when things don't go to plan? Do you have kind of core principles or tenets that you try and think about? Because I'm sure it literally happens every single week.
I would say we learned early on that you have to be prepared for things to not go as planned. And you have to almost embrace that idea and have the grit to adapt when you need to. So the power of adaptability as a founder, especially a young founder, is so important. And every time, to your point, every day or week, there was a different crisis or different, sometimes existential crisis where you're like, what are we going to do? And in those moments, it forces you to really come together. And, John, Nate, and I are very complementary. And we'd put our heads together and say, okay, how can we turn this crisis into an opportunity? Mm-hmm. How can we actually use this moment to think about doing it a different way or flipping it or getting better? And most of the time, that's what you can achieve. And so it's about not panicking and not freaking out and just really focusing on controlling what you can control and the solutions. You
mentioned your co-founders. You 3 have been together now for almost 2 decades, yes, which is basically unheard of for a 3-person team to stay together, all 3 co-founders still on the same team after all of this time. What's the secret sauce?
I'd say I'm so grateful to have the 2 of them. And this last almost 20 years has been such an incredible journey. And, we're lucky that we found each other. And I think what makes it work is a few things. The 3 of us were all very different in certain ways, so we were complementary. In terms of the parts of the business we gravitated towards, our skill sets, the art and science of it all, we kind of were all very complementary, but we had this shared single vision. We all wanted to build the same thing. For years, we actually, loved that it was 3 of us like making these decisions together because it was almost like a 3-headed filter. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like 1 versus 1. It allowed us to really play devil's advocate or consider a different point. It's been a really fun ride. I would say that the most important factor has been from an early age in our business career, because we didn't know anything about running a restaurant. there was a lot of built-in humility there, just naturally. And so we tried to maintain that and just know that every single day, one of us is going to be right about something, one of us is going to be wrong about something, and we just have to listen and be open to each other. I would say when it came to Sweetgreen, there was always a what's best for Sweetgreen when making a decision, not who needs to be right.
Now, a few questions on that, because your family had this restaurant experience, very, very strong restaurant experience at that. Did you find that in those early days, because you three didn't have as much hands-on experience, were you calling your family at home to be like, hey, we have this issue with food, how can we get through it? What was that like?
Yeah, what's interesting is both John and Nate's parents were also all three of us have parents that are immigrants and entrepreneurs. So we all grew up in this similar environment of our parents building something and pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into it with partners. My parents were partners. They'd like work all day together, then come home together. That was modeled for us. We saw that. We understood what it took, and it excited us. And, at the time at Georgetown, that wasn't as typical. People kind of dreamed of being the banker or consultant or foreign service, which Georgetown was known for. We kind of found each other, and it was interesting that we all had the same experience. And so our parents were all super helpful, but they were also at the same, very supportive more than helpful. They were kind of there for us, but they said, go raise this money, go find this money from other people, prove yourself, prove this business. We're here to support you. But my parents, knowing how hard the restaurant business were, never really pushed me into it. And they said, if this is what you want to do, go learn.
With the three of you, when there has been, and I'm also sure this has happened many times, when there's a key decision that has to be made, do you find that it's been helpful to have three? Because essentially it's like 2 versus 1 on some issues. How do you think about just the dynamics of 3 co-founders specifically?
Yeah, I'd say it's changed over the years. For the first 10 years, we were co-CEOs.
Yeah.
And, it worked. And then we raised a lot of money and decided let's divide and conquer a little bit more and kind of lean into the parts of the business where we were strongest, where we could use our superpowers. But at the same time, we spent just as much time together talking about the business. For most of Sweetgreen's life, we've either lived together or across the street from each other, worked together, shared an office for most of that time. So we spend a lot of time together. And so it's always this ongoing conversation. And there's always moments where, we don't always agree on things. And to your point, we always felt like the 2 versus 1 made it almost easier to come to resolution. Because if 2 people felt so strongly about something, the third trusted the 2. And there was never, we had this rule, there could never be like an I told you so. Because again, like I said, we always knew we'd all be right and wrong about things. Yeah. And we're all just trying to make decisions in the best interest of Sweetgreen. But honestly, having 3 of us and having co-founders in general just is a lot more fun, a lot more rewarding. When things are really good, you have someone to celebrate with. When things are really bad, you have someone to kind of like strategize and commiserate with, and you don't feel so alone. And so I often look at solo founders and I'm looking and think how hard that must be.
The 3 of you grew the company for the next decade, and Sweetgreen went public in November 2021 at peak market exuberance. Yes. This is the frothiest of all frothy times. Sweetgreen hit a market value of over $5.5 billion. What was that IPO day like?
You are right. We went public, very sheer luck and timing right at the peak. I think, experts tag the peak as like November 21st. We were November 18th.
Wow.
And we literally went public there. So timing was on our side. We got really lucky there. And we just knew, as we had raised a good amount of capital from some really professional investors, many of them public market investors. And we knew that for us to achieve the scale we wanted it and to build Sweetgreen into the company and the scale that we thought it could be, we needed to unlock even more capital. And, the markets being where they were, we really believed it was the right time and the right way to really access capital to fuel the growth. And so it was an exciting process, grueling writing the S1. And, Nate especially went deep on writing that S1 with all of our partners in the office. But the actual day of going public was incredibly rewarding. And we really wanted to make it feel like a win for the whole company and all of our stakeholders. We gave stock out to all of our team members. Every team member from dishwasher to manager got stock. And so they could be part of it. We brought some of our farmers to the floor of the, IPO. And so, seeing them at the New York Stock Exchange was really pretty incredible. And we brought a lot of our operations leaders. We brought this one woman, Ceci, who is now runs a whole region for us. But she was like an original manager that turned into area manager that trained dozens and dozens of leaders. And so she was such an important part of our story. So we kind of had everyone there, all these early supporters, early investors, farmers, friends, like it was our whole community.
I've heard from several founders who have taken a company public that one of the most gratifying moments is, of course, it's a big deal to IPO, but having your team members there with you, because it really is this tremendous shared experience. And I mean, you guys, it's not like this in the AI world that we're in now. You have companies that can launch, raise hundreds of millions of dollars in IPO pretty quickly, but your team was growing this for over a decade. Yeah. Today, your role is Chief Concept Officer, and you alluded to the fact that you and the co-founders were co-CEOs at one point, and then more recently there was the division. So what does being a Chief Concept Officer look like?
So even when we were all co-CEOs, I really spent more time and gravitated towards anything that was product related. So culinary, supply chain, all the ethos work, that kind of translates to some of the brand and like marketing work because our food is our brand. And so I always kind of played in that world. So for years in my role, all of our roles have changed a lot over the years despite titles. I've always kind of helped own and control the food, and which starts with our supply chain. And so, one of the hardest things we've built is our supply chain, and just really rethought so much of what you traditionally would see in a traditional fast food restaurant. For me, I spend, a lot of time down in the lab with our culinary team, trying, tasting, ideating, and a lot of time with our supply chain team, especially these days.
What's that process like, the ideation? Because right now I am currently obsessed with the cauliflower palm bowl. It's so good. I get it like twice a week. What is that ideation like?
I would say it's the most fun part of the job. And after doing it for 18 years, it does not get old. It only gets better. And we have this brilliant team of culinary creatives. And sometimes we'll bring in some outside creative to just help, spark us, or we do a lot of big chef collabs. And so we're constantly trying to be inspired by the world of food, by the world of farming, by our consumer and what they're thinking and what they're consuming. But honestly, sometimes there'll be like these light bulb moments in the culinary lab where you're like, we wanted to do it like this, but someone spits out a crazy idea and all of a sudden you have this product that will be a hit.
Yeah.
So the creation in the lab is really pretty rewarding.
I'm going to compare this to fashion in the sense that with fashion, you're often having to make these forecasts on trends pretty far in advance. And especially with Sweetgreen, where the supply chain is incredibly complex, you're trying to make these forecasts far in advance. And you can look at these, so many different categories of food have had their hot moment. I remember years ago when kale came from like a nothing lettuce to like the lettuce, right? Yeah. It's still pretty hot, but I remember when it had this glow up, and like same with avocado. People don't remember when avocado wasn't sexy. Now avocado toast is like $20 at an LA restaurant and we just don't even bat an eye. But I think that there's some magic there in the trend prediction of food. So I don't know. How do you think about that?
I would say it's one of the most interesting parts of my job and what we do at Sweetgreen is for 18 years, we've kind of had a different perspective on fast food and food at scale. And obviously how you source it and what ingredients you're buying, but also, what you're serving, the flavors and how you tell those stories. We obviously want to grow and be able to feed everyone, but we also want to make sure that we can push the industry and the food conversation forward. And so we spend a lot of time listening to the world around us, to food culture, to our consumers, seeing what people are building, how are people eating in different parts of the country and world, just trying to understand where the world is moving, where the puck is going. And, I can think of so many times in our history where we kind of took this leap and wanted to tell a story about an ingredient or a way of thinking about food that was definitely barely seen in food, but definitely not seen in fast food. Just the kale example, we were one of the first to do like a kale Caesar. And at the time it was like, people didn't know what kale was.
Yeah.
And it was like 2009, 2008. And people thought it was like, the weirdest ingredient. But then it became very popular. I think we're one of the largest chains, if not the largest chain in the country that doesn't have a Coke or Pepsi contract.
Wow.
Which, if you want to do some back of napkin math, how much of a fast food restaurant's profit comes from that program, it's pretty wild. We were kind of the first in the space to put up your farms and sources on a board in the restaurant transparently. And I remember when we did that in year 2 or year 3, everyone was kind of like, no one wants to know that in fast food. And we're like, oh, we think they do. And we were buying from some of the same farmers that I would see at the fine dining restaurants. And I'd see these chefs at the market sourcing from the same farms we were buying from. And I'm like, I want to get credit for that. I want to make that connection.
What you just named, having the exact suppliers on a board, Sweetgreen really pioneered in that space. But it's a complex feeling knowing that you're doing something like that, where it's clearly Sweetgreen's doing this first. And then you see many replicas of that across the board. How do you think about that? Is it a compliment? Do you see it as a little annoying? What's your POV?
When we started Sweetgreen, people looked at us and said, that's not a real meal. People don't want to eat like that, and obviously the consumer conversation on food has shifted so much. Now some of the things that were niche are more mainstream. So you see all these competitors and all these other people doing versions of it. And overall, we see it as a good thing. It validates the need state, it validates the consumer, that's where the consumer is going and growing. We see it as good validation. I think it puts this constructive pressure on us as a business to just keep evolving and making sure that we can meet the customer where they are, even lead them where we think they're going. And so, and as you get bigger, it's harder to evolve and pivot as quickly. But that is kind of the mandate still, is really to think about where the customer is, how do we serve them, where is the food industry going, and where do we want to take it.
Can you share any specific info sources? Like, where do you go for that information? Is that just talking to other restaurateurs or Google trend searches or like Pinterest? Pinterest, you know how they come out with their predicts.
Yeah.
One of the trending items for 2026 is cabbage. Who knew?
Yes, it is. I would say, again, this idea has been really important to us because we had this belief that if you just do everything the way everyone else does it and say the same things and serve the same things, you will obviously just look like everyone else. You'll have no differentiation, no point of view. And even if your point of view is a little weirder sometimes, you have to tell stories that are unique and ownable. I mean, one of my favorite things we ever did was this collaboration with Dan Barber when he launched his Row 7 seed company. And, this was someone that I looked to for a lot of inspiration from his book called The Third Plate. We look for a lot of inspiration in fine dining, understanding where the kind of like most creative chefs are thinking about pushing food or pushing flavors, and even their just approach. And Dan Barber had this whole radical approach to thinking about your ingredients in the plate differently. So he inspired a lot of what we did. And so we got the opportunity to work with him. We bought 100,000 seeds of his kogi nut squash and said, let's grow this squash together. No one had ever grown it at scale. Let's kind of like, he just invented this vegetable. We're like, let's bring it to life together. So we planted it in 23 acres, 6 farms around the country, and crossed our fingers and hope it would come out of the ground. And it did, and it was delicious. And we had this whole campaign around how flavor is king, how everything is like the flavor of this squash can sit at the center of your plate the same way other hero ingredients do. And we literally had Dan Barber on a billboard in Times Square with a squash. I think we're probably the first people to put a vegetable on a billboard in Times Square. And it sold really well. But the point of it wasn't just to sell well. It was to kind of to create a narrative and a story and get some attention and tell people what we believed about food.
The narrative and story is, I think, more important today than it has ever been, especially in a world that social media is the new television and social media is spread so quickly. And really being able to share a story, a brand story, an ingredient story, whatever it is, on social is super important because that's how people are getting their information. And Sweetgreen does a fantastic job on the social front.
Thank you.
We talked about the supply chain of it all, but I also want to talk about the macro climate with where the consumer wants to spend their money. The Sweetgreen salads right now, per what I was reading, average around $14 to $16. And there's always this natural tension, right? Where you've talked about this mission-driven supply chain with really high quality ingredients, and that's super important. That's essential to the Sweetgreen ethos and brand. But there's also the side of meeting consumers where their wallet is today. Yeah. So how does Sweetgreen really think about this tension?
First and foremost, our approach has always been to just try to spend as much time understanding the customer and obsessing over the customer and understanding where they're at, what they need, how are they consuming things. And so value is definitely very top of mind for consumers today. And so at Sweetgreen, we think about it in a few ways. A, looking at our current menu assortment and pricing and making sure that we have a range of prices, so entry points, and people can kind of self-select the journey they want to be into. I think extending the range of our menu, so we've got a lot of really exciting menu innovations coming, new categories, new products, that will, I think, create some really strong price value moments. And then really, we launched our new loyalty program earlier this year, and it's been a huge value lever for our customers to start to earn as they're spending at Sweetgreen. And so, between that and a thoughtful promo strategy, it's just really important for us to understand where the consumer is and how do we actually listen to them, and serve them what they need.
When you're assessing where the consumer is today, is that through quite literally talking to your customers? How are you getting that feedback on Sweetgreen?
Yeah, I would say we are very data-driven at Sweetgreen, but we also believe in the art and science of it. So we spend a lot of time looking at industry reports, talking to analysts, looking at consumer sentiment more broadly. But then we have a consumer insights team that spends all their time talking to customers, surveying them, doing in-depth interviews. Even, I just came just now from like a taste test focus group from some new products where we just invite customers into the lab. And so, whether it's talking to one customer for an hour or talking to 10,000 customers for a couple minutes on a survey, we try to really understand as much as we can about the consumer. And it's really important. And I think to your question before, in moments like this where we feel certain pressure and we know the consumer feels a certain way, in some ways it'd be the easiest time to kind of relax our food ethos and go back on things that we really believe in. But we actually believe in this moment, it's actually when you're tested and when it's really important to hold true to it and dumbing down the food. And there's ways we're obviously optimizing our food and our labor and COGS and like we should responsibly, but walking back some like core pillars of our beliefs in food is not how we're thinking about it.
I've also read that Sweetgreen is trying to scale to over 1,000 stores by 2030, which is a very large number. First, where's the brand today? How many locations are there in the US?
Yeah, so we're at about 290 restaurants.
Okay.
In 29 states.
Okay. So we are going to 3x in 4 years. How is that going to be possible?
Yeah, listen, whether it's 2030 or a little later, the goal is more to show that we think the total addressable market, the TAM, as it's often referred to, is there. And we believe that, Sweetgreen can serve communities all around the country. And we look at some of our competitors that are more specific flavors or cuisines that have thousands of locations. When we say 1,000, we see that as kind of like the next goal. But beyond that, we believe we want to continue growing. And the vision is really to have Sweetgreen be able to feed everyone in every community.
When we're talking about the footprint of the 1,000 or however many stores it is Sweetgreen putting any thought into the format, kind of doing a smaller version of it? Because I would imagine that you have to be thinking very outside of the box here on how you're going to get to that number.
You're totally right. I mean, such an important part of us growing and opening new restaurants and serving customers the right way is having the right formats and experiences for them. And so we have a number of formats now that we have. We have obviously our classic Sweetgreen restaurant. We have kind of our digital pickup kitchens where you're ordering ahead and you're picking up. And maybe you can order there, but there's no seating and you're just kind of grabbing and going. We have now our drive-thrus. We have our automation, which is kind of an engine that can sit in a lot of those formats. And Costa Mesa was a really exciting milestone for us. It was our first automated drive-thru and our first true drive-thru. And so, that was, on our founder vision board was a bunch of things. And one of them is, healthy fast food drive-thru.
In a perfect world, if you're looking at that vision board, are drive-thrus a more significant percentage of your existing portfolio?
I think as we get to the level of scale we're talking about, like 1,000+ restaurants, that becomes the clear growth driver and format that you want to explore. I mean, when you look at places like Chipotle and Starbucks, I think 70 or 80% or even more of all their growth in the last few years has been with lanes or drive-thrus. And so just understanding where the consumer is once you kind of migrate outside of these dense urban areas, which is where we started, and we're heavily concentrated, but we're now, open in all these amazing suburban communities and shopping centers and places that, are not just in an office building.
I know that there's been so much conversation across the board with Starbucks specifically as being this third place and how there's been a little bit of a degradation of that third place because there was so much of a expansion into what some people say is too much of the grab and go and mobile orders. How do you think about Sweetgreen as a third place in those more sit-down locations?
We think about it a lot, and we think about it in terms of really understanding the neighborhood and community that we're opening in and how that consumer behaves and transacts. And is it, next to the gym where they want to sit down after, or is it, their quick lunch downstairs from their office building? Understanding the consumer pattern and kind of consumer journey and making sure that we build the right Sweetgreen for that community. And so that looks like different things. In some neighborhoods, it's like 50-person patio and huge seating inside with booths and two tops. And And, like in college locations, we love to put stadium seating where students can kind of do their homework and relax a bit more. And so it kind of goes back to this idea of understanding what customer you're going to be serving in that trade area and that community, and making sure that you're building the best Sweetgreen experience for them.
When we're talking about the Sweetgreen experience, the company transitioned from this tiered loyalty program to now something that's more point-based. So in that transition, I know customers, whenever you shift any kind of loyalty program, there are lots of questions. There's sometimes concern. Sometimes people are like, what's going on here? So what did you learn about your customer when you made that shift?
We learned a lot with all the different iterations of our loyalty program, and really it helped inform this new one that we launched, which is a bit more classic in architecture and really is, I think, simpler for the consumer to understand and really interact with, and at all levels of our frequency and customer cohorts. Some of our previous versions were a little more geared towards high frequency customers and not as much for new users. And so we wanted to create a program that was personalized in terms of the rewards for the type of customer, and then just make sure the value is really clear.
And I would imagine with the Sweetgreen app specifically, where people are racking up those loyalty points, just the level of data that you have from that first party app. Are you ever looking at that first party data to inform other decisions that you're making within Sweetgreen?
We have such a large digital part of our business, whether that's people ordering ahead or ordering for delivery on our app, or, we've now unlocked scan to pay in our restaurant, so you can pay with your app at the register, which is pretty new for the space. And so with all that comes, the data of who the customer is, what they're ordering, all that normal stuff you'd expect. And it allows us to really understand, especially from a menu point of view and frequency, what people are ordering, how often they're ordering it, what are they changing in the bowls, what are they adding, what are the average tickets. So we kind of look at a lot of data to understand where the consumer is. And then based on the insights, we kind of understand where we need to go.
Sweetgreen acquired Spice in 2021, specifically for their robotic kitchen technology. And during the recent earnings, the company stated that they are selling Spice to Wonder for around $186 million. So what led to that shift in strategy?
For the past 8 or 9 years, one of our theses was we believed automation was going to be a big platform shift in food. And when you look at the typical fast food restaurant model, we believe there were going to have to be moments of leverage with automation to kind of remove the more monotonous, repetitive tasks in the restaurants that, quite frankly, have really high turnover. We really invested in automation, tried to, we were building some solutions ourselves, and then we met the Spice guys, which was really fortuitous because it was 4 founders out of college that wanted to build the future of healthy fast food. And so we kind of, had aligned divisions, and they were basically building an automated version of Sweetgreen. And so we said, listen, we have the scale and the menu and the supply chain. You have the technology. Let's come together. So we acquired them. And we actually met them through one of our first investors, famed chef Danielle Boulud, who was an early investor in theirs too. It's been now a couple of years, and it's been incredible to have them as part of the team. And they had this amazing technology, but it was not built for scale yet. So we spent the first year or two of the acquisition building the next generation of this automation and this what we call the Infinite Kitchen, and have brought it to life in 1 restaurant, then 2, and then now we have them in about 25 restaurants. So it has become one of our main engines. And it's really exciting to see it work. It's really exciting to see what it does for the customer experience, for the team member experience. And, we're still learning a ton every day about how to even design that experience around that machine versus a classic Sweetgreen. And at a certain point, we realized we had built this thing, kind of the first in the space to have a fully functioning at scale with proper uptime assembly model. And there's a lot of spot automation in the category, and a lot of spot automation that hasn't been rolled out. We have this technology that we thought could scale, and we realized, listen, for where we are in our life cycle, we're not going to be opening 500 restaurants a year anytime soon. And we think this was actually bigger than just Sweetgreen. And this technology that was built and optimized just worked really well. And so we always had this belief that it could be bigger than Sweetgreen. And so really giving it, a bigger platform to grow. And then, obviously the capital was great for our balance sheet. What was really nice is we maintained, obviously, the license to use the technology. So we get to use it the same way we would have if we owned it.
In the most recent earnings, the CEO said that there currently right now is a little bit of a value perception problem. And I want to get into what this means for anyone who's listening who may not know that term or understand what that is. We're not just seeing this at Sweetgreen. As we've mentioned, there are many shifts going on with the consumer right now. The consumer is holding on to that wallet tighter than ever before, being incredibly intentional about every single dollar. And we're seeing slowdowns across the board. Why do you think this shift is happening? And what are you thinking about it in terms of what Sweetgreen can do?
I think if you look at the last couple of years for the consumer, from the employment market to stimulus checks to COVID, and that whole journey has been kind of wild for consumers. But I think this year especially has been the most jarring because, at different points this year, everything just got really expensive in their life. Everything, whether it's tariff related or just, inflation from the past couple of years, our consumers really feeling it. And you see it in every part of their spend. And so consumers are pulling back. And so it's important for us to kind of understand not just price and value, but also price value. So we think a lot about that price value equation. So not just what is the price of the bowl or the meal, is do I feel like what I'm paying is worth it? Part of it is creating some value levers and having promo and loyalty and great pricing strategy. But the other half of it is really making sure that we communicate to the guests everything we're doing and where the value is in the bowl. So everything from our supply chain to the scratch cooking, to all the flavors and all the interesting items we're coming out with. It's really important for our consumers to understand everything that's going into your bowl and how it actually is pretty different than most other fast casual restaurants.
So when you say different, can you be a little bit more specific? Like how different is it from me going to Kava, for example?
Yeah, I'll say some of the biggest differences between Sweetgreen and other players in the fast casual industry. You can go down every category of our menu from we don't cook with any seed oils. I think we're the only chain at scale that we're the first, and I think we're one of the only. Some folks have now done it, which is great. The amount of organic and local produce that we buy and greens, no one else in the category does that. All of our proteins are no antibiotic ever or grass-fed, grass-finished. That is something you cannot find in the industry. It's actually shocking to see consumers in a retail setting care very much about the attributes of things like chicken and beef. When they walk into a restaurant, they ask less questions about it.
So true.
And so we're trying to be more vocal that, we have built this, and it's really been hard. It's been an uphill battle to build this, no antibiotic ever protein supply chain. And our team works really hard on that. Our menu is free of any artificial stabilizers or refined sugars or dyes or, preservatives. And that sounds easy, but you realize that there's a lot of those things are like sneakily in a lot of ingredients in fast food restaurants, from artificial dyes to refined sugars. And so for us, making sure we maintain a really clean set of ingredients is so critical. And yeah, just getting to work with all these incredible farmers. And part of our storytelling is telling the stories of, some of these growers we work with that are the best growers in the country. When peach season hits, we are buying Frog's Hollow Farm peaches for the whole West Coast.
Wow.
So we become their biggest customer. Consumers can taste the difference. And so when I talk about price value, it's also important to talk about those things. And what we're finding is more and more consumers do care about that. And so again, we still need all the right pricing and value strategy to go along with that. But understanding what customers really care about and what they're willing to pay for is really important.
Yeah, I think what you just said really resonated with me. I was just having a conversation about this a few days ago. Consumer psychology play that's so different when someone goes in to order something that's being made for them. There are so many instances where you would order something at a register that you wouldn't buy in a grocery store. And it's just something happens when you walk into that establishment and you're like, I'm here to order food. And you just lose the questions that you would normally be asking.
I think we've also, the more we've learned about our consumer, what's been really surprising is we learned that even, a really good Sweetgreen customer, I think rewinding like a decade, we used to have this really pure view of them of like, you're a Sweetgreen customer, this is how you eat, this is what you care 90% of the time. And we realized that our consumers actually kind of trade around into a lot of other concepts that you wouldn't even expect. Like a lot of our consumer does eat at McDonald's. And that was surprising to us when we learned it. But we realized that people use Sweetgreen for those decisions in their life and when they want that utility or that they're craving that experience or craving that flavor. But consumers, I think more than ever, their eating habits are more varied.
When I ask you who is perfectly in that average range of a demographic for Sweetgreen, it sounds like, that just blew me away that the Sweetgreen customer is also eating at McDonald's. I would not guess that. From a financial standpoint, can you give us any data of like who this target demo is?
We look at the demographics and psychographics. We're just really trying to understand who our customer is and how they think, obviously all the demographics that go into where they live and how, their education and earn what they earn. We started on the coasts, but, I would say we've now spread out to we're in almost 30 states, and we're in every region of the country, from the South to Texas to the Pac Northwest to the Midwest to, we just opened in Arkansas last week. I think we've gone beyond just coastal, and we're now kind of in every major market in the country. And so really understanding that consumer has been really critical, and making sure that we can pick the right real estate, tell the right stories, build the restaurant the right way.
Do you find at the price point, because as we've been talking about, price point is considerably, one of the biggest elements that someone thinks through when they're making that decision of whether or not to shop at Sweetgreen or otherwise. Do you find that the discretionary income level of someone who's shopping at Sweetgreen has changed over the past few years?
Our consumer has definitely broadened. When I think of the typical line of customers I would have seen in a Sweetgreen 10 years ago, it was kind of what you would expect. Kind of a more millennial, skews female, high degree of education. And today we walk into our restaurants and you see a full, range of consumers that you wouldn't have seen in our restaurants years ago. And I think that is because of not just where we've opened and the brand awareness, but I think also our menu broadening, adding things like these warm plates and steak and these items that I think appeal to a broader consumer has brought in much different types of consumers. So it's really exciting to see that. One of my favorite things when I walk into a Sweetgreen and I see like a post office worker or a construction worker and people that I would have never imagined would eat Sweetgreen 10 years ago. And now they're, I see them online.
From a narrative perspective, because we've kind of been talking about the branding of different ingredients and food options today. From the narrative perspective, I've recently seen a bit of media press, and I'm actually thinking of a restaurant that's not Sweetgreen for this example, but like this concept of bowl slop, right? I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure Sweetgreen is aware. How does Sweetgreen think about this bowlification of our lunches and dinners, and kind of how to combat that narrative of it's just a whole bunch of ingredients that are thrown together? Because I'm seeing it a lot, and it's obviously not that, but how do you think about it?
It's a really funny term, and I think we get tossed into that category at times where I don't view Sweetgreen as a slop bowl. It's like incredibly thoughtfully sourced ingredients, and maybe they're mixed up, maybe they're not. And yes, it happens to be a bowl. But again, I think it's important for us to think about extending the range of our menu beyond just bowls, which we're doing. But for me, slop bowl kind of implies like shitty quality product. And so that might apply to some places, but we don't identify as slop bowl at Sweetgreen.
Do you think that right now the space is overcrowded? We've seen so many of these fast casual and healthy players enter the space. When Sweetgreen started, it was truly pioneering and as close to creating that model as possible, right? There were other players, but you really commercialized it, expanded, and it helped to really take it into the mainstream. So how do you think about Sweetgreen competing now that there are so many players in the space?
Yeah, again, I think it's validating. I think the pie has grown. So I think there's more consumers that want to eat this way. And so again, I think it puts pressure on, a pioneer brand like Sweetgreen that helped create the category to keep evolving and meeting the changing customer. I would say one thing that's really fascinating today is that the consumer is changing faster than ever. And part of, broader world events the last couple of years maybe have exacerbated that. But the consumer, you have to stay really close to them because it's changing almost faster than you can change things in your physical spaces sometimes.
So much of what we've talked about around the brand has to do with the in-store experience and the food, but I want to talk about some of the brand initiatives that Sweetgreen has done beyond that space. Because when I was doing research, I was reading about this fascinating Sweetlife festival, which I want to make sure my listeners hear about because it really is so cool. You had Lana Del Rey headline one year, for a company that started just creating salads in Washington, D.C. to then having a festival that went on for 6 years with these major headliners. That's very unique. I think you're one of one on that front. So what did you learn about creating this, and also provide some context as to why that started in the first place?
Yeah. Well, so it started in a really funny way is when we opened our second restaurant in DuPont Circle, we picked this site that was literally, our kitchen door would open onto the largest farmers market in the Northeast, the DuPont Circle Farmers Market. And we loved that. We met a lot of farmers there. When we finally opened our doors, we realized all the traffic was actually on the other side of the street and that customers were there, they just were 50 feet away. So we needed to get their attention because our business was suffering. We went to Guitar Center, bought a big speaker, plucked it right outside our front door, and just started blasting music every weekend and every night, and having like sampling food and just like inviting customers to be like, hey, look at us, we're over here. And just kind of not block party, but kind of the beginnings of what a block party vibe could be. And little by little, it started to work. Sales grew, we acquired customers, and we said there's something to this like community experience of bringing our customers together. So we built, in that farmer's market, we had the block party with 1,000 people and hot chip DJing. And the year after that, we met the folks from Merriweather Post Pavilion and said, let's actually do this bigger. And so we ended up, one thing led to another, and we ended up hiring The Strokes to headline when their new album came out. And we had 15,000 people, from like a parking lot to 15,000 people in one of the most iconic music venues in the country. And that was the beginning of the birth of Sweetlife. And the idea was we wanted our consumers to connect with food in a different way. And music for us, and musical experiences like a festival, are some of the most enjoyable and social and emotional, experiences. And so we wanted to kind of weave food into that. We would also take over all the concessions and bring in our farmers and bring in other cool brands and restaurants. And so you'd be at this food and music festival, and you'd be having like this like amazing quinoa salad or like a Jose Andres sandwich, and like watching, Kendrick Lamar play. And so, yeah, it's really exciting. It was really fun to do that for 6 years.
And why did you shut it down?
We paused it because, it was, we really were at that moment from going from a regional brand to a national brand. We ran the festival ourselves. We did everything. Like our marketing team for like 4 months of the year was just the festival. And we realized we needed to, really focus on our growth and focus on expanding the brand. We talk a lot about bringing it back. So I would say just look out. Hopefully one day it'll be back.
I feel like 1 year, obviously a lot's going on right now. This probably isn't the best time, but 1 year you should have just like a throwback and actually do it.
Would love that.
Have like Taylor Swift headline, like really go all out.
Yeah.
Okay.
She actually came 1 year.
I did read that. She came with
she was
Calvin
dating
Harris.
Calvin Harris.
Yeah. Fascinating. So she did attend. She'll come back. Okay. Yeah. Next Eras tour will be at Sweetlife. Yes. Okay. So we're going to the questions I ask every guest. Can you share a system that you have in place that benefits your career or business? And it can really be a system for anything.
Yeah. I would say one of the things that really drives me and feeds my curiosity is meeting new people in different industries or different stages of building a company. So like young founders, old founders. And I just love meeting new people. So I try to meet one new person a week and just learn from them, understand what their world is like, what they're building, what challenges they face. A lot of times it's things that connect to the business and we can do things together. A lot of times it's not. I often find I have a list of folks that I want to meet or connect with, and they're in different cities. So I keep like a by city list of like people that I want to catch up with or connect with. And so that when I'm flying to Chicago, I'm not trying to remember who the person was I wanted to connect with. I have that list. And so, but I get a lot of joy and like stimulation from just meeting new people and talking to other founders, because I feel like so much of our inspiration has actually come outside of food also. Really understanding how other brands have told their stories or built their products or differentiated. And so hearing that from other founders, and especially today, the way you build a business today is very different than how we built it. And so I find it fascinating and want to make sure that I understand the world we're in versus just the world that we built in.
And for once a week, first, that's a lot. Yeah. That is a lot of time to dedicate to this. Very cool. Does it have to be IRL in a person? Oh, so you can do like a Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next question comes from the Social Currency Corner, where I get your input on a trend that's impacting business or culture. And for this one, I need to ask you about this protein craze that we're seeing, because Sweetgreen recently launched a Power Max protein bowl that has made waves on social media with 106 grams of protein, which is very serious.
That's a lot.
Do you see this type of thing as a one-off, or is this the beginning of some kind of bigger shift in how you're thinking about designing the menu moving forward?
I think we get really excited about the idea of functional food and food as medicine, and understanding your macros and how it feeds your body and is fuel is all part of that. So the Max protein plate was a bit of a stunt to kind of like show the extreme and kind of poke fun at this protein maxing trend, which we're a part of. But, 106 grams of protein is a lot and not for everyone. And, I've had a lot of people order it that probably aren't supposed to order it, that give me feedback that it's not right. My mom ordered it. And I'm like, Mom, it wasn't meant for you. But it allowed us to tell a story around the importance of your macros, the importance of clean ingredients. And so there's going to be more of that coming. And I think it's really exciting for consumers, that care more about that these days. And we also did just launch a macro calculator on our app. So in real time, it kind of tracks the macros as you're building your bowl.
Ooh, that's very cool. So let's end with a listener question. This question comes from Jordan. I'm a restaurant manager and I'm seeing terrible employee turnover. People quit after just a few months. What are some really important things that you've learned to retain good people in an industry that's known for burnout?
This is one of the most important parts of our business and job. We're a people business. We have 8,000 team members that show up every day to work. Turnover in our space is wild. It's like 150+%, which that means if you have 100 employees, you're hiring 150 new ones every year. Just revolving door. Our turnover is way less and going down. And honestly, we've seen it actually be even better in a lot of our automated restaurants. And so I think, for us, what we focus on is really also focusing on the team member experience and understanding what goes into that. I think ultimately the thing that matters the most to team members is wanting that development path and that opportunity to be developed and to grow and to have opportunity. And we have so many of our incredible head coaches, which is what we call our general managers. So many of our head coaches that started as a dishwasher or a team member, and 3 years later, they're running their own restaurant and making 6 figures. And that idea of kind of the American dream and showing that path is possible and giving them all the tools to say, we're going to invest in you. Do you want it? Mm-hmm. And so people seeing that opportunity and that ability is incredibly powerful.
Just giving people that next step or something to strive for.
Yeah.
That's great. And that's an awesome note to end on. So Nicolas, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. Before you go, take a second to subscribe to the show wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And if you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast. It massively helps the work I do to bring this show to life. And if you have a friend who is as obsessed with business and culture as you are, send this episode to them because sharing the show is one of the best ways to support it. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen, and produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.